As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
Our decisions are based on what we value in life and what our goals are. And that oftentimes means that it decides on what we either act on or what we stop acting on because it no longer serves those values. It no longer brings us closer to those goals.
Psychological flexibility is noticing all of those thoughts that might be leading to paralysis, noticing all of those uncomfortable feelings, observing, opening, making space, and really making those behavioral decisions based on the values rather than what the thoughts and the feelings are trying to dictate. We are 4 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, and author of Act for Burnout, Act Daily Journal, and the Act Daily Card Deck.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and author of an upcoming book on being a better conversationalist and making friends.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hey, everybody. Happy New Year. To celebrate the end of 2024 and the new year, we've decided to do an extra special co-host episode. And we have a very, very exciting announcement. There's a big change that is happening. I feel like maybe the big surprise person should announce what that is.
I'm back. I feel like that's the creepy way to announce it, but this is Yael reporting back after about a year and a few months of a break. I couldn't stay away, so I begged to come back. Now, this was a conversation that sort of organically emerged that I was really missing co-hosting the podcast, and you all welcomed me back with open arms, and I'm so excited to be back in the co-host seat. So here I am.
Woohoo!
Well, we kind of begged you too, if you remember. There was mutual begging. And in fact, we had some listeners bring it up in our survey. So you should feel very welcomed back.
Basically, the best news of 2024 for us is the best news for our listeners going into 2025.
Oh, thank you guys.
And what was the thing? I loved it. I kept repeating it that Emily said, we hope you follow our hearts. Like instead of follow your heart, she said, we hope you follow our hearts. In other words, we all really wanted you to come back.
And I just want to speak up for Debbie, since she hasn't contributed yet, that she's going to be a woman of few words in this episode because she's battling laryngitis. But do you want to just say hi, Debbie?
Yeah, I was about to chime in, but my voice sounds terrible. I actually feel okay, but I lost my voice over the weekend and it's not back. And so I'm here and I'll probably speak occasionally, but I apologize. I sound really bad. But I'm here in spirit, and I'm so thrilled that Yael is back.
Hi, listeners. It's Emily. You may have heard me reference my small group course, Parent Smarter, Not Harder, and wondered, what is this and how do I find out more? So I carefully designed the 6-session course to meet the needs of parents who are eager to support their children's skills and competence, but don't know how or where to start. We meet virtually for 1 hour a week over 6 consecutive weeks. We not only explore what it means to you to be a good parent, but we set realistic goals for meaningful change. Just listen to what one group member said. I came away from the group coaching experience with a clear framework for making changes at home with confidence that benefit my boy's autonomy and my sanity. Enrollment is officially open only for the month of January, so act now if this sounds like a good fit for you. There are limited spots because I like to keep it small so we can go deep. For more information, visit my website, emilyedlinphd.com/course.
So one of the things that we thought we could talk about in today's episode is decision making. And I don't know about you guys, but this comes up in my practice all the time. I have an anxiety-focused practice. And so it's really common when people are struggling with anxiety and worry. There's like so much uncertainty that comes with decision making and lots of like waffling and flip-flopping. And it can be a real challenge. And so Yael, obviously leaving was a huge decision for you. And then deciding to come back was a huge decision for you. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, and I think decision-making science is something that I am enamored with. I just think that the ways that we think that we rationally make decisions are often shown through research to not be so rational. We're very biased in our decision-making. We're very poor affective forecasters, meaning that we're very bad at guessing how we'll feel about a decision down the road. We over-index on things that we've already committed to. We under-index on things that require big change.
Wait, what do you mean by that, over-index and under-index?
So we sort of have decision inertia. So we tend to think there's this thing called the endowment effect, where something that we've already committed to in our minds kind of has greater value than something that we haven't yet tried, even if the thing that we're committed to isn't working for us. And in the episode where I departed Psychologists Off the Clock, we talked about how we have a hard time quitting things that we're already a part of because there's this sunk cost fallacy that like we feel like, oh, I've already invested so much in this and I don't know if the other thing will work out well. And so one of the other errors that we make in decision making is thinking that once we've made a decision, that it's a bad sign if we need to pivot again. And so we tend to get very rigid about decisions once we've made them. And this is actually something that Emily wrote about in a recent newsletter post that I just loved, but it's something that I think about a lot too in the couples therapy context. And maybe I can come back and talk about what I do in the couples therapy context. And Emily, maybe you can say a bit about what you wrote about.
Well, I think I wrote about it in the context of smartphones and deciding when we should give our children smartphones. And there's this sense out in the parent community that I've picked up on of, well, once we do it, we can't take it back. And I am saying, yes, you can take it back if it's not working. And so I think there can be that trap in parenting decisions as well, of once we say yes, that's the end of it, when that is absolutely not the case. But we kind of fall into that black and white thinking.
And that leads to a lot of rigidity, and it creates this situation where we can't learn from the decisions that we make. We end up in like this decisional fixed mindset rather than a growth mindset. And what we want is to be able to make a decision, to gather information, and to allow that to inform whether this is a decision that we stick to or whether it's a decision that we need to have some flexibility around. And so this gets to the heart of something we talk about a lot on this podcast and in acceptance and commitment therapy, which is this concept of psychological flexibility.
Yeah, so the idea with acceptance and commitment therapy is to simplify it to the bare bones, that our decisions are based on what we value in life and what our goals are. And that oftentimes means that it decides on what we either act on or what we stop acting on, because it no longer serves those values. It no longer brings us closer to those goals. Or maybe the context of those goals and values has changed as well. And we just need to but it's a difficult thing to do, to alter our behavior based on those two things.
And it means having to make space for the fear, the uncertainty, the doubt, like all the stuff that inevitably pops up when you have a decision to make. And I think the higher stakes the decision, the more intense those emotions can be. And kind of back to what you were saying, Emily, I have a client who's struggling with a big decision right now. And a lot of hers is fear that she'll commit to a decision and then change her mind and not be able to go back. So it's not about smartphones, but it's really that same thing that you were talking about that leads to this inability to move forward because of the
paralysis.
Should I, shouldn't I? Should I, shouldn't I? And which leads to that paralysis. So that psychological flexibility is like noticing all of those thoughts that might be leading to paralysis, noticing all of those uncomfortable feelings, observing, opening, making space, and really making those behavioral decisions based on the values rather than what the thoughts and the feelings are trying to dictate.
Yeah, because these thoughts and these feelings will have the stopping power of a brick wall. If you don't have the tools to deal with them you will never get to a point where you make them go away or you just completely remove the punch that they can at times deliver. But you do learn to bring them down to an amount where they're still somewhat of an obstacle, but they no longer have that brutal stopping power. And you can make your way towards your goals and your values despite having those thoughts and those emotions, which very often will stand also in direct contrast to those values and those goals. So an example of that might be, I'm often working with people who, when they want to work on their confidence, one of their big goals is, I want to start talking to people on the street or in the grocery store. I just want to be able to turn around and start a conversation with the other person. And what stops them from doing that is very often, well, I don't want to be a bother. I don't want to bore them. What if I'm annoying? Which is a thought and an emotion. In this case, it's more of a thought that shows up for them because of their value of being, respectful or being pleasant to be around.
Right. And it's an example of how we get hooked by language. And if we listen to the language, it leads to that paralysis. And what happens when you make a choice, like if you do have that conversation in the street or you leave the podcast or come back to the podcast or anything else, you're letting your experience dictate what is actually going to happen. So instead of relying on assumptions or judgments, we're letting our experience guide our way. And I think I've said this on the podcast before, but one of the conversations I often have with clients about this is we have this belief that there's a right or a wrong decision and the outcome is going to be good or bad, when in reality, there are decisions and decisions have consequences. And typically there are some we like and some we don't like, but we can learn based on those experiences and then continue to shift and pivot. That this whole decision-making process can be a lot more fluid, or it is a lot more fluid. But when we get hooked by language, those judgments, predictions, assumptions, it doesn't have that fluid feel to it.
Yeah, and so wouldn't it be nice to approach decision-making more like a learning process rather than a, finite, like you do one thing, you make a decision, and that is the decision for life. And I often think about this as approaching decisions like a scientist, of experimenting with whether a change works for you, a pivot works for you, collecting some evidence for a trial period. And this is actually something that I do in a very structured way with couples in the therapy room. When we talk about, I have this framework of teaching communication where we talk about understanding conversations versus decision-making conversations. And under the framework of decision-making conversations, I walk people through this 5-step process where they define what the issue is that they need to make a decision around, clarify their needs and values, brainstorm solutions as creatively as possible, decide on something that they're willing to experiment with, and then set a trial period to try a solution and collect data about how well it works. And then at the end of the trial period, to come back and together assess, how well did this work? What did we learn? Does it need tweaking? Do we need to go back to brainstorming? Does it work just fine? And we can kind of mosey along with the solution as is. And that's a process that creates a lot more flexibility around decision-making than having this idea, this belief that we should just know whether something that we're going to try will work before we try it. And I think this kind of opens people up, and certainly has opened me up, to take some risks and to learn and grow, because it doesn't feel like you're foreclosing on something some alternative thing that might work better. And so it sort of prevents that paralysis that can often come in decision making.
And for how long do you factor in this time period that it's going to take to develop the skill to use that new technique? And so that a couple might, after maybe 8 weeks of testing this, come to the realization, okay, this is not working for us. Is it really not working for you folks, or has the skill of using that technique not developed fully yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think that question about what is a good trial period really depends on so many factors. And, for a couple that's trying, a new approach to intimacy or a new approach to co-parenting, you can try it for a couple weeks and begin to gather evidence, but not have all the evidence is probably what's going to be the case. But that doesn't mean you can't, like a scientist, come back and say, well, what have we learned from a few weeks of trying? The thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to sort of pivot too quickly and try something different before you've had a chance to reflect on what you've tried. And so I think, like, for example, just coming back to me leaving the podcast, I was away for over a year, and I had many moments in the very beginning, in the middle, towards the end, where I was like, I'm not sure that I'm doing the right thing. And as you all know, because we have remained good friends, these are things that I've shared. But it really wasn't until after the year mark that I sort of started floating, like, I don't know that I want to never come back. I gave myself a good long time because I really wanted to give myself a chance to kind of sit in this new position. And I think that might be too long for a lot of people. A year is a good long chunk of time, for example, in the parenting domain. So you might want to come back more quickly, but it is helpful to kind of not just throw too many things at the wall and see what sticks, because then, like a scientist, you're not sure what is the activating ingredient or what isn't working. So you want to sort of slow the process down a little bit, but not so slow that you feel trapped.
Recognizing that change and doing something new is very likely going to be uncomfortable for a little bit. If you're at the beginning of a learning curve, and so you don't want to dive back to the old thing just because there's some discomfort doing a new thing, and sort of giving it some time for that to get a little bit more comfortable, which it usually does with practice or experience, so that discomfort isn't the thing that's driving the decision to change your mind, to go back.
One of my favorite memories from my first year of doing the podcast is one of our co-host episodes where we did talk about decision making, where Jill went through her wise mind questions, and I have used that with clients and friends since then, and myself. And I think what really stood out was the question, if you weren't feeling anxious about this, what would the answer be? And to me, and in my clinical practice, anxiety can be such a cloud. It feels like a cobweb, mucking things up. And once you can clear that out of the mind, how much more clearly you can see. So even entertaining the hypothetical, pretend like you had no anxiety about this, and then realizing how clear a decision can be, then it's really realizing, okay, I need to work on what is underlying that anxiety about this decision.
I love that. And then I think, too, that values and really clarifying your values and like your why for making a particular decision is so helpful. And it really is through trying things out that you learn a lot about what really matters to you and what doesn't. I mean, you can do a lot of those hypotheticals, but to some extent, it's really like in the doing where you learn, like, oh, I'm missing something, or, ooh, this was really meaningful and important and purpose-driven for me. And for me, leaving the podcast was a values-driven choice to sort of be more thoughtful about my writing because I was feeling so stretched thin. But what I didn't realize is how much I would miss the community element that comes through podcasting that I really can't access through my writing and private practice or my academic work. And that wasn't something I didn't know. It was actually something I talked about on my departure episode. But I sort of didn't realize just how profound that lack would be of not having this community of wonderful people to support one another, to talk about interesting ideas, to, I don't know, have like a shared goal. Because a lot of my professional goals are things that I do so independently. And I really missed that. And it was maybe not surprising, but maybe surprising just how big of an impact that loss had on me.
And I think there's also a level of acceptance that whatever decision you make, you're giving something up, most likely.
Yes, everything has an opportunity cost.
Yes,
Yes.
100%.
And I do think that's part of what keeps people paralyzed is thinking that if I just work out the pros and cons in the right way, I will land in this place where I'm like, oh, yes, clarity. This is the right decision. But even right decisions have opportunity costs, and making space for that to be okay is such a big part of moving forward when you're making a decision. And the other thing too that I think we touched on a little, but maybe not quite enough, is the importance of holding those outcomes lightly, because you can take a stab at what you think the outcome is going to be, but there's no way to really know. And we don't control them. There are so many factors that can dictate how a decision goes. And the only thing we really get to control, and this is back to values too, is like how we move our hands and our feet and our mouths. We control ourselves. We don't control other people or our thoughts or our feelings. And, there are a lot of factors that can impact how things go. And I think just being able to hold those lightly and willing to pivot if the outcome isn't what you expected. And Yael, I think even going back to this idea for you with community, you definitely had a sense that was something you were giving up. And I think I'd seen you trying to do that with your writing, like partnering with other people to write, like trying to create that. And so you've done the things that you can do to create it, and it just hasn't resulted in the same oomph as you have with this team. And I think that's a really good example of it, is you can do all the quote unquote right things to make that happen, and it just may or may not, because it's only 50% in your control.
100%. One other thing that I'll say too is the power of clarifying your values is that there's so many different ways to manifest your values. So I do know that I'm somebody who really, looks for community and connection. I mean, I'm a relationship researcher and therapist, so I get the importance of connection. And I know that it's important to me in particular. That's like part of how I'm wired, is that's like a really fundamental need that I have. And so I did try hard to find different ways, and some work better than others. And I realized that this was like a really ideal way. But I think if it hadn't been possible for me to come back, which was totally something that could have been true, right? The machine kept going without me and there might not have been room, that I would have found a different way. And again, that's just like a nice thing about values, is if you realize that you need community, there's a million ways that you can build community through spirituality, through hobbies, through book clubs. There's so many different ways. And I think that's another kind of freeing thing that helps us stay flexible in decision making, particularly when we do this experimentation and this values clarification, is that there's a lot of different ways to meet the things that are important to get our needs met. And once we figure out what they are, we can sort of move with some flexibility to try to figure out how can we optimize without going for perfection. Like there's no perfect outcome, right? Like this won't be perfect. I'll be stretched too thin and worry about my time management. Like that's sort of inevitable. And there will be ways that I can kind of work through that with the support of this wonderful community. And so I think it just kind of helps us to stay flexible rather than paralyzed or trapped.
I think one of the things that needs to happen is we have to be creative. Like sometimes it means thinking outside of the box when we're trying to think of other ways. This might be a story I've told on the podcast before too, and so stop me if I have. But I had a client once many years ago who had severe chronic pain, and he used to be a basketball player, not a professional basketball player, but basketball was a huge part of his life. And then he had an accident, an injury, and he was in a wheelchair, and he could no longer play basketball in any form. He couldn't play in his chair either. And so he quit, and then he went through this like really severe bout of depression. And so a lot of what we worked on is, well, what was it about playing basketball that gave you like zhuzh and meaning and fulfillment? And we tried to figure out, what those pieces were and what the values were so that he could get back into that, even if it meant doing it in a different way. And it didn't just kind of come to the surface quickly. It took quite a bit of work for us to figure that out. And ultimately, he went back as a coach. And what I think is really important about that is that decision was not pain-free, because now he had to sit on the sidelines and actually watch other people doing what he could no longer do that he desperately wanted to do. And that was painful. But staying home and doing nothing was also painful. So in both instances, he had pain, but in this coaching instance, he also had meaning and vitality. And I think that's just such an important piece of what our jobs are, is sometimes we have to think outside the box and really be flexible about how we're going to embody those values. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's magically going to feel happy and joyful.
That reminds me of the story that Annie Duke tells in her book, Quit, that I think she shares in our podcast interview. But she is meeting with this woman who's an emergency room doctor, and the person is like absolutely miserable in her job, but feels like she worked so hard to get there and she's not sure she'd be much happier elsewhere. So Annie asks her, what are the chances that a year from now you'll be happier in your current job? She says 0%. She'd tried everything to make it a better situation. It was just like the structure, the work, it just was a miserable situation. And Annie says, well, what are the chances that if you apply to a different job, you'll be happier? She was like, maybe 50-50. And Annie was like, well, sounds like better odds, right? It doesn't mean that it's assured. It could be worse, but there's that possibility too. But there is the possibility that it could be better, which seems not to exist in the current situation. And so we have to take a risk if we want to make change, or we have to accept that nothing is going to change. And I think sometimes, just to kind of carry this analogy further with Jill's example, is that depression often feels safer, right? Because it's familiar, even though it's miserable. Staying in a familiar but unhappy situation feels safer because at least it's the devil we know. But if we really want a chance to make a change into something better, it sort of requires us to take a risk. And yes, there is a risk that it could be even worse, but there's also the possibility of something much better. And that's scary, but also so empowering.
I mean, I've also experienced and observed what can come with novelty, the upsides of novelty, which is an energy boost, more stimulation mentally, emotionally. So I think we sometimes shortchange those benefits as well. It's not even about the outcome as much as the process of putting yourself out there, doing something new. It can be exciting. And I think in the middle of the decision-making, we don't connect with that as much as we do the fear and anxiety and potential loss.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to a treatment called behavioral activation for depression, why behavioral activation is so effective. And basically, the treatment is to get people active. Like if you get out of bed, if you take a shower, you tend to feel better. It's like the doing that actually makes you feel better rather than any particular outcome that you're aiming for. And I think it's because it feels empowering, right? And you're switching things up, and there's something that really helps you to overcome this learned helplessness that can come about when we're feeling kind of paralyzed in our movement.
And you're putting yourself in positions where you can at least have the benefit of potentially getting feedback, reinforcing feedback. The depressed mind will assume everything's going to be bad. And not just when you're depressed. If we're afraid, like a lot of times we are more likely, that negativity bias, we're more likely to think of how things could go wrong. And it's instead of relying on that language, it's putting yourself in a position where you're experiencing and getting feedback that goes, oh yeah, oh no, this isn't so bad. I like this. This novelty is good.
I feel like this is great timing to be having this conversation about change because of New Year's and how people often, the turn of the new year and the change, starting to get lighter. January, the holidays are over and we're moving into January 2025. Often people are wanting to use that opportunity to make a change, like a big one or a small one in their life. And I think this is inspiring and important to remember. Sometimes change can take effort and work and be hard, but there can also be so many benefits when we do make those kind of changes.
So just to dovetail on what Debbie just said, one of my favorite episodes that we just re-released last week is Jill's interview with Katie Milkman on her book, How to Change. So if you haven't checked that out yet, I highly recommend it. It's a good time to do so.
And as the people that are on our book club list will also know, is that we have a book club, a 2-part book club on How to Change by Katie Milkman happening in January.
Yeah, so if people are interested in joining, they can just send an email to offtheclockpsych@gmail.com and just say, I'm interested in the book club, and we'll make sure you get all the info.
I think it's great with this timing to be doing this for people who really do want to make a change. Like, we know that coming together with other people in community helps with change. And so this can help support you in that.
Absolutely. And that's a big plug I always give. I actually just did a talk to an amazing organization called Hiring Our Heroes, and they help military spouses get back to work or pivot. And, one of the things I talk about in the talk is when you struggle to be psychologically flexible on your own, if you really can't kind of get out of your own way, you can really lean on your community, because oftentimes they see things we don't, or they see us with different eyes than we're able to see ourselves. And I think that is something that they really use in Hiring Our Heroes, is really building that community to help them move forward with big, scary new things. And, it's such a big piece of what you've been talking about here today, Yael. And I think it comes up more and more in the episodes we do, doesn't it? This like role of connection and community and relationships and how important it is.
So before we move to part 2 of our agenda, coming to the connection and how people seem to look for it more and more, I think that there are 2 reasons for that development. And one is that we've just been starved for connection during the plague years. And also that the second part is that during that time, people learned that it's actually possible to connect online, and that you can have book clubs online and laugh together and be happy to see the same people again a couple of weeks later. When I started my first group coachings on Zoom, I had to explain to people how Zoom worked, because this was 2016. It wouldn't even cross my mind to have to explain to people how this works. There's, Zoom karaoke. There's I remember fondly singing "Let Me Show You the World" by Disney's Aladdin together with Robin Walzer, and she got her roles wrong, so she was singing my parts. And those are just things that in this day and age, hi Robin, by the way, if you're listening, sorry for selling you out, but these are the things that 5 years ago, telling a story like that would have just led to people shaking their head, like, what is this guy talking about? Meeting over Zoom, what are you talking about? And now it is very typical to just get together over Zoom. I mean, how often did I meet with Yael in the year that she's gone and I had to cry myself to sleep every night? But how often did we just meet over Zoom for a coffee? Something that I think also a couple of years ago would have been very weird to get into, but people got used to that. And so we have this balance of people just looking for connection a lot more, but also being handed more tools to actually do that.
Okay, so let's all check in. Let's all reflect back on 2024 a little bit, maybe a highlight or something that stood out from this past year, and then just something you're looking forward to in 2025. Who wants to start us off?
I'll jump in here. This is Emily. So looking back, can see that 2024 was a year of doing very scary and hard things. And it started in January when I got an email really out of nowhere asking me to jump on a plane in a few days to go to NBC and be on NBC News Daily. Everyone thinks I was on the Today Show. I was not, but it was still a very thrilling experience and also terrifying. And then I know I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but I did the debate with Jonathan Haidt in July, and that was a live international event hosted by the Institute of Art and Ideas, also terrifying. And I've been a podcast host for a year, and that started out very scary. I think I'm getting calmer and more confident, but it has been a year of nerve-wracking experiences, and I am proud of myself for saying yes. It was all a choice. And I just knew, no matter how scared I was and how anxious I could get, that I would feel worse if I said no, because I would feel like I gave something up that could have been a really cool opportunity.
We're proud of you too, Em.
Well, and I have to give credit to all of you for pushing me. I remember when I forwarded the email from NBC and I said, I cannot do this. It's like 5 days away. And Jill said, you put your husband in charge and you get on a plane right now. You're doing it. And I'm like, okay, she's right. So looking ahead, I would like a bit of an emotionally calmer year, which is probably famous last words, but I am excited to really invest time into connecting more directly with parents. And that is beyond my writing, which is very much behind a keyboard, and beyond podcasting, which is again behind a microphone. But I have this Parent Smarter, Not Harder small group course that I meet with parents in a small group. And it's just, I did one round. That was my pilot round this year. And it was the most meaningful experience of connection and feeling like I was helping people make truly meaningful change with the ideas I've been working on for years and years. And so I am hopeful that that will really grow this year, and I'll have more of that.
So listeners, tell all your parent friends.
Yes.
And you have put so much just work and energy and heart and soul and thought into developing this course. And it's so fun to see it come to fruition. And I have all my fingers and toes crossed that it becomes everything that you hope that it becomes in 2025.
Thank you. Yes, this was the building year. New website, new branding, new group. So this is hopefully the stable maintenance year, but we'll see. I always say that at the beginning of a year, and it never turns out that way.
Well, I can jump in because I feel like mine is almost a little similar, like not in content, but sort of in like, I don't know, process or feel. And it's that I have like really wanted to do more public speaking. And I've done like, I don't know, dozens, maybe hundreds of webinars and workshops and talks, but I've really wanted to do more keynote speaking. And I actually did my first official keynote, and I did it for free because I wanted the experience and the exposure. And it was the right decision I made. It was a local conference. So I connected, back to community. I connected with so many incredible women. It was at a women's business conference. And I've stayed friends with them, and I'm like meeting with them regularly. And so that's been incredibly fulfilling. But the best part was I'm usually someone who kind of wings my talks. Like I make my slides, but I know what I'm going to say. I don't like practice. There's not a lot of precision. And I wanted to do this keynote differently. I wanted it to be, a really precise beginning and pack a punch. And I was so nervous. And you guys, when I got up there, the laptop was not on the podium. So I couldn't see my slides. The organizer had it over on a separate table. And luckily I had memorized it because all I had was a clicker. I mean, talk about an unexpected variable that could have been really problematic, but luckily I had memorized it. And so I gave my first official keynote and I got a standing ovation. And it was like, seriously, like one of the best. I cried. I like bawled my eyes out. And I will admit, my inner critic immediately popped in and was like, oh, they're just being nice. This audience of women, they just want me to feel good. But there was another keynote and there was no standing ovation for that other keynote was very good, but there wasn't a standing ovation. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take it in that this was actually, what I had to say. And I've had many of those women reach out to me still being like repeating back things I had said during that talk. And that was last May, that stuck with them. And that's why we do all the things we do, right? It's like we hope that what we're learning and what we're teaching will impact people. And so I just find it so rewarding when I hear from people, when I do talks and they reach out, they email, they come up to me and say, this thing you said, this really impacted me. And I did another keynote where one of the attendees went to their professor who actually organized the conference and told her that the title of the talk is Do It Scared, Challenging Outdated Ideas About Confidence and Success. And so one of the attendees went and told her, since I heard Jill's talk, I've already been doing it scared, and outlined a couple things that she had been avoiding doing that she did because she heard me speak. So, and that just is so meaningful to me. And the reason I podcast and the reason I speak and the reason I write is because I think about all the people who can't afford therapy, who I want to get these same messages, the same psychological flexibility that the 5 of us all use and benefit from. every day. So anyway, that was kind of my like meaningful highlight in a professional sense. And so similar to you, Emily, for 2025, I've been kind of slowly building over the past year, and I'm hoping that 2025 is going to be the year that I really start getting more of these gigs. And I created a demo reel, like a speaker reel that will be done and finalized here by the end of the year. And so I've got all sorts of irons in the fire to try to get some more of those like corporate speaking gigs. And I'm thinking about like how to niche my audience. And initially I was going to be mostly speaking to women, but I think I want to speak to women in male-dominated fields. Like I think there's a real need, like in STEM, where they want to have more women in leadership roles. They want to work on retention and promotion of women in those industries where I feel like the kind of messaging that I share could have a real impact with them. So fingers crossed, that's what I'm hoping for and working on and looking forward to in 2025. What about you, Yael?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I'm inspired and excited to hear more from Jill and Emily on the speaker front. And I think that your goals are so powerful. And I think the podcast will hugely benefit from the work that you guys do and get to bring back to this platform. So my highlights for 2024 were getting a very barky dog. That's like definitely my kid's highlight for 2024. And you can currently hear him in the background.
Cute.
He is adorable. He's a Brittany Spaniel. He's got high energy, and he is my three boys, the love of and light of their lives. They now neglect me sorely because they are so passionate for this puppy who is very cute. But professionally, I think my highlights for 2024 were writing a lot more regularly about relationship science for non-academic audiences. I had the huge privilege and honor and delight of writing pretty regularly for the Washington Post for a period of time. My newsletter on Substack, Relational Risks, has become a regular part of my life in such a joyous way that I get to share the science of relational thriving and the science of how to recover from relationship fractures with a non-academic audience. And my hope for 2025 is that I have a couple of things cooking that I'm hoping to share with our audience to be doing more dissemination of relationship science through writing. And then in addition, my specific podcast goal is to really dig into some very cool relationship science on the podcast, because as we've all noted, community and connection is so integral for our well-being. When our relationships are not going well, it is hard to do well. When our relationships are going well, so many paths open up for us in terms of how we feel and what we're able to achieve. And so I really want to use the podcast to have on a lot of experts who do this research, who write about this kind of content, and to really help people learn more about science-backed ideas for relational thriving. This is sort of my mission in life. So I'm really excited for 2025. And as new things come up, I'll be excited to share them with the podcast.
Can't wait for those episodes.
I'll share a couple of my highlights. My Act for Burnout book came out last January, and so a lot of the year was consumed with the launch of the book and some events and interviews that I did. And so that was exciting. And it was very nice to have the book off of my plate of things to do. And so that opened up time to do other things, which has been wonderful. And one of those things was traveling with my family. And a highlight of 2024 for me was just recently over Thanksgiving, my family of four, we extended our Thanksgiving break and we ditched the traditional Thanksgiving and we went to Italy for 11 days. And it was just the best, most amazing time. It was the first time my kids had been over to Europe, and I have always loved to travel, but don't get to do it as often now that I'm a parent and, busy, and we've had the pandemic and everything. So I think for me, that was just the best experience. It was one of the best trips I've ever been on in my life. And looking ahead to 2025, I'm still really enjoying this hiatus without a book on my plate. And so I plan to just stay the course. I love being a therapist and doing my private practice. I love this podcast. So I'm going to continue doing those things, but I don't have a whole lot of other professional goals at the moment. I just want time to travel, read for pleasure, sleep. I've been sleeping more, which has been amazing. Cook meals, write for fun, like personal writing just for fun. And so, until further notice, that's my plan. It's just to keep doing those things. It's been really nice.
Debbie, you've achieved like the decisional gold of like you've arrived and are pretty content with where things are. And that's a beautiful thing. Like it doesn't sound like you don't have goals. It's just to keep doing the wonderful things that you've been doing, which are ambitious and effortful and satisfying. And that's so cool.
I'm sure that I'll get excited about something at some point, but even in this period of time between my trip to Italy and, Christmas and New Year's, I'm finding that my ambition is like so ridiculously low. It's been great.
Well, it depends how you define ambition. Maybe your ambition is to rest and rejuvenate and tune into yourself and what your body needs. That's a worthy ambition.
The other day, I just stayed in bed reading a mystery novel. Of course, I've been sick too, so, and I was just like lounging all day reading. I was like, this is great.
That's the life.
How about you, Michael?
So many things I could talk about professionally this year and next year, but I'm going to tag this on to Debbie's special Thanksgiving. I had a very insightful Thanksgiving that I want to share. So Thanksgiving for me in Europe, we don't celebrate Thanksgiving, but for me, this is always a special weekend because all of my American clients are doing their Thanksgiving stuff. So this is one of the very few weekends that I have, like it's a long weekend that I have completely off. And I spend it in the 80s. I just immersed myself in a lot of the childhood stuff that I did. I was rewatching Alf, the TV show. I was the laughter from Yale. That's the laughter of recognition. It gets a little bit darker there as well. I listened to an amazing podcast that I've never binged a podcast like this. It's in German. It's called Young in the 80s, and it's two brothers my age growing up just an hour away from where I grew up. And they talked about their childhood. They talk about TV shows, music, musicals, the advertisements. Like this was the 80s. And for me, like going through these TV shows and those episodes, I felt really like pulled back into my time as a kid. And I had a beautiful childhood. I loved my childhood, which is why I like to spend so much time there in my heart still. And so I'm listening to this podcast and I feel like I'm sitting in the room with those kids as they talk about Ninja Turtles and He-Man. And what I only realized going through maybe 10 or 12 of their like hour-long episodes is that they recorded maybe one or two every year, very slow hobby project, which meant that as they were talking about things, suddenly one of them bought a house. One of them talked about a girlfriend, a fiance, a wife. One of them talked about having a newborn. And you could just see how their life was developing through these episodes. It was like 8 years of doing the podcast. And one night, they did this amazingly cute thing where they brought their mom on an interview. And they talked about, hey, Mom, how was it like to have us as kids? And it was such a heartwarming, beautiful episode. But at the end of the episode, they said, well, there's a reason we don't have Dad on. And that's because he passed away 10 years ago. And I went to sleep and I had tears in my eyes because I felt like so connected to that family. And then the weekend progresses and Michael keeps listening. And I'm sitting in an Asian restaurant waiting for my meal. And I listened to the last episode. And they end the episode by saying, hey, see you next time. Have a good one. And then they tag on this extra recording where they say, hey, look, like this is going to be the last episode because what happened is that our mom passed away and we are now fathers. We don't have parents anymore. We're the fathers. And now we need time for our children. And I'm sitting in the restaurant and I'm barely containing myself from crying because I was thinking, yes, sadness there for sure, but also this beautiful continuation of them saying, hey, we're the parents now, we're going to rock this. And it just contrasted for me so wildly with how much time I just spent in the past, for the lack of a better word. The Alf TV show They tore down the house. Someone, I don't know if this person is listening, but someone bought Alf's house, tore it down, and then built their own house. The house is gone. The little kid that played Brian passed away in 2024. And for me, like looking into all of those things, there was the beauty of the 80s, but also like this sense of time passing. And the realization that came out for me from that particular long weekend, but the observation of this, over the years that me dabbled in the old school stuff, was that I want to start a family with all the work that's going on. And there are always projects, and there's the book, and there's the video course. And at one point, like if this stuff doesn't become a priority, it's probably not going to happen. I mean, we're not going to get into discussions of how this all happened for you, because this might turn into a 3-hour episode. And maybe it's just like boom, and it suddenly happens. But in my book, this needs to be intentional. Like there needs to be time put aside. There needs to be energy and conflict and consequences and all of the things, the prices that might have to be paid. Raising kids. I know like food goes into one end and you have to clean the other, but this is as much as my experience goes for raising kids. So I want to make this a priority going into 2025 to start a family, build a family.
All right. So all of our matchmakers out there, get on.
Yeah. Like, subscribe, share.
This episode could have just changed your life. You don't know it yet.
I love it.
It's a big one, Michael.
It's a big one.
That is a big one. And hey, we'll put all the stuff in the show notes for Emily's course and Yael's Washington Post articles and her newsletter and all the different things that we've talked about.
My
so
Tinder account. Yes.
Yeah. And right. I was just going to say, and like whatever Michael's online dating profile is. Well, Yael, welcome back. Yay. We're so happy and Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Also
Happy
looking
New
forward
Year.
to continued collaboration with all you amazing friends.
And it will feel new with 5 of us. It's never been like this before. Yael and I are very good friends, but we've never co-hosted before. So I'm
I know.
excited.
Right.
Well, I left at the worst time because Emily and Michael joined, and I was like, wow, it just got way more fun, except I left. This sucks. I'm going to try not to take it personally, but I took it a little personally.
Well, now you're part of the fun. We're all going to have fun together.
All right. Well, on that note, Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.
Let's do a little. Nope. Hold on. I have a cough drop in. Okay.